Earlier this year, Arc System Works announced their second 2020 title, Guilty Gear, which is set to release sometime next year after Granblue Fantasy Versus. And yesterday, for the first time, they showed us actual in-game gameplay. This is something I've been waiting for since the reveal of the game, because over the last couple years, Arc System Works has turned me into a massive fan. While I've never played a Guilty Gear game seriously, I've been very hopeful about Guilty Gear's 2020 entry. Well, the stream started off with a look at the game controls, and I have to say, when I first saw this, I was surprised. There's a lot of stuff on this screen. The reason I was surprised about this is because the lead developer, Daisuke, has previously talked about wanting to make a simpler Guilty Gear, and I thought this would affect both controls and mechanics, but it seems like this game's going to be focusing on bringing in those systems and mechanics, bringing them in line with what they should be, as opposed to reining in the controls, rather than focusing on the execution of those systems, which I understand the thought process of. Simplifying the mechanics and the raw gameplay is definitely a good idea, but I think we're going to find out that it's going to be less effective than easing in a new player just by simplifying the controls. Regardless, it doesn't affect me too much at the end of the day, because I don't think Guilty Gear is going to be trying to bring in those new players that I would like to see in the fighting game community, because I think Guilty Gear is mostly happy with the target audience that it has. They then showed off this character select screen, which I think is amazing. One thing I haven't had much of a chance to talk about on my channel since I started it, even though I do think I have talked about it once or twice, is the idea of fighting game character classification or categories. In other genres of competitive video games, we have very clearly defined roles, things like tanks, damage dealers, and supports. In fighting games, we could have fairly similar categories, although it is a little more difficult because it is a 1 versus 1 game, so those categories start becoming very specific and very difficult to define, and there's going to be people who disagree with the classification of characters, which again is fine, because again, even in those other genres, there are people who debate whether this character should be a support or whether they should be a tank because of various roles that they end up filling in any given meta. Regardless, something like this to define each of these roles is incredibly important for a new player. Heck, even me, someone who's familiar with fighting games at this point, can get some value out of this, because I've never played Guilty Gear before. Looking at this character select screen, I gained new information. I now know that Chipp is probably a rushdown character. That stuff is incredibly important. The more information you can give to a new player while making it kind of a seamless integration, the better, because you want to bombard them with information, but you don't want them to feel like they've been bombarded with information. And I think this is a nice, simple way of integrating it into the core game, which will either go unnoticed or someone will get a lot of value out of it. Another nice quality of life improvement is this stat screen. It shows up at the end of the match, and it gives you a little bit of information about how you played. It tries to give you an idea of what you did well and where you can improve. Awesome stuff. That is so valuable. But looking at the actual gameplay, honestly, it just feels like a sequel. Don't get me wrong, that's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, I would say it's probably not a bad thing. I just wasn't expecting that. I was expecting some pretty major changes to Guilty Gear, and I'm sure there's a lot of mechanical nuance here I'm missing because I didn't play the previous games seriously. I mean, I played them, I just didn't play them anywhere near high level. For example, here are some changes, at least according to the Arc System Works employee who was showing off the game. Counter hits are incredibly important, far more important than they've ever been before. On top of that, Dust is no longer a universal launcher. In fact, it only launches on a counter hit, making counter hits even more valuable. And there was even a developer interview. In this interview, it came off like they were almost trying to make the game a little more footsie based, which is an interesting direction to take, and I think that's also good for new players. When you make a game more footsie based, you're inherently making it slower, which I think is good for those new players, because even though in any fighting game, each button you press is incredibly important to the result of that game, it feels much more important in one of those footsie, slow-paced games. The developers were specifically asked about GGPO and rollback netcode. They said they weren't going to be talking about that right now, but they understand that it's a concern of the communities. Not sure what that means. In all honesty, I think that's probably just going to end up being, hey, we changed something about netcode. It's still not what you wanted, but we changed it. That would be my guess. They were also asked about crossplay, which is a bit of a bold question. The developer basically said they didn't want to talk about that. It said it's a very difficult thing to talk about because it's a very difficult thing to implement. This felt like a deconfirmation to me without actually being a deconfirmation, so definitely don't expect crossplay for Guilty Gear. I mean, if we get it, that's awesome, but don't hold your breath. Oh, and of course, they showed off 2 new characters, Chipp Zanuff and Potemkin. Both of these characters look incredible in typical Arc System Works fashion. they've done it again. Arc System Works continues to deliver, not only with its core audience, the anime FGC who's really looking forward to this new Guilty Gear game, but even a broader audience who might not traditionally play fighting games, with titles like Granblue Fantasy Versus, Dragon Ball FighterZ. It feels like we're on a turning point for the fighting game community. I'm really interested to see how not only Arc System Works, but all of the major fighting game developers react to the major shift that I'm sure Project L will be. I'm guessing Arc System Works will probably lean into license work moving forward, trying to get more companies to work with them. I'm not sure what that's going to look like. We're going to have to wait and see. Regardless of where we end up in the end, I think it's incredibly fair to say that the fighting game community and the fighting game industry has a bright future. I'm probably not going to be taking Guilty Gear 2020 super seriously. I'm going to play it more seriously than I've played any other Guilty Gear game, but I'm not going to be playing it a lot. Don't get me wrong, I'm still excited. It's Arc System Works and they're going to do an amazing job, but I'm much more looking forward to Granblue Fantasy Versus and what Riot Games has to offer with Project L, which I'm expecting to have a 2021 release date, or maybe 2020, leaning a little more closer to 2021. But yeah, like I said, regardless, fighting games are looking up right now, and I'm so excited about it. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know what you think of Chipp Zanuff and Potemkin. My name is Bilbzy, and I'll be sure to see you in the next video.